My name is Tarek. Welcome to Thorin's YouTube channel.
When Brazil first arrived on the scene, they came out of nowhere and then kaboom, they were making some noise. It took them a while to figure out the key stars they'd need, but the trouble is that since then, the luminosity of some of the great Brazilians of old might have blinded some to the talent in the Brazilian scene now. But might I be rude? M-I-B-R. And ask, why can't they get back on top again? Is it a lack of drive? Is there not enough energy? Well, then maybe like you, they'd like to take advantage of GamerSup's limited time only sale, where instead of the usual 10% off an order, you can get with my code Thorin, Thorin, at gamersups.gg. For the rest of the week, you can get 22% off. The sale runs until either 7 p.m. CET, so that's like 2 p.m. EST, on the 9th of February, or until stocks run out. You can obviously get all the GamerSupps lines of Citrus Lemonade, Guacamole Game Fight 9000, all the shakers, the waifu ones, the ones where you see the tits, the fucking shine, different colours and whatnot. By the way, if you're an old man like Fallen, maybe you want to check out their tea. Give old granddad his tea with the L-theanine sleepy time. Let him just go off. It's 2016 again and I'm still relevant. Definitely pay 700k for me. So anyway, you get the point. Check out the sale. Use the code Thorin, Thorin, while stocks last. Now, the failure of Furia at Katowice is hardly something new. Like, they've basically been quite an underwhelming team ever since they made this roster move, even before that. You have to basically go back to the end of 2022 for when they were a really good team and they didn't have problems. Then, obviously, they had like the one little run at the SBU Masters, but that's not a massive tier 1 event. Now they haven't even got into IEM Katowice. And as a result, there are 0 Brazilian teams in the main event of IEM Katowice. One of the prestige events, one of the top 3 or 4 events of the year. Brazil is just irrelevant at this tournament. Now that is insane, because right now there are still Brazilian players who are among the best in the world. There are still many, many Brazilian talents within their scene. There are all sorts of actual teams playing at like the tier 1.5 or tier 2 level or low tier 1 level. So where are these top teams? What's going on? Because that's my big problem, is that the assumption from people who don't know the Brazilian scene will just be, they were just a scene like the Polish scene. Great example. Especially now, you see how people like ENCE and Nine have come along and shown you something. But people thought, what happened is there was just the Virtus Pro players. And once you couldn't get a combo of them or them plus a couple of other people, it was irrelevant. So basically, there was no Polish talent. People might think, it was just obviously those like Immortals and or SK/Luminosity rosters. Aside from that, there probably just are no good Brazilians. So yeah, you've got to make a team from Cold's era and Fur, and will FNX come back, and is Fallen still around? Charco, what's he doing? And get Zeus. No, you don't have to just recreate that. That's probably the stupidest part about this equation, is the Brazilian talent base is enormous. I'm being serious. For one country, it is enormous, guys. Like, it can actually be seen by how even when Furia had the 2 best players, as in they had KSCERATO and Yuri, when they were the best players in Brazil, the underdog teams from Brazil could still actually cause upsets at events like the MIBRs and Pains of the world. And they used to play EU teams close, especially in group stage games before all the pressure hits. I mean, if people don't know, Fluxo almost beat Team Liquid at the Blast Paris Major and eliminated them. Imperial with Fallen had that last run at the Blast Spring Finals where they were like almost in the finals. They were a couple of rounds away from that. MIBR at those Blasts, Pain at the Major and getting through the RMRs. What happened was, Furia didn't maximise their talents. So when they were supposed to be the super team, they didn't properly take the place of an SK or Luminosity. The best they did was 1 semi-finals of a major, and that's it. Aside, and then obviously they'd make the odd like semi-run in a big tier 1 tournament. But they weren't winning tournaments, they weren't winning championships, they weren't even really threatening. They were maybe a dark horse at best. And quite frankly, the best dark horse years they had wasn't 2022. It was back in 2019 and then in 2020, but we were online, wasn't it? So that was when the team looked its most deadly. So the saddest thing to me is, in theory, like, this lineup is the first attempt at actually making a true super team when they added Fallen. Like, aside from that, if you're being real, I mean, first of all, it's kind of a shit attempt anyway. And yeah, obviously, KSCERATO had some real life issues. Like, he had something going with his dad. I think his own health. I think he got ill at one point in time. But the problem is, it never worked as a super team. In fact, it wasn't even as good as past Furies that had drop and had safe for those other guys in. Then there's the notion, and this is a wider problem in the Brazilian scene, that like the Furia players, especially the ones you might want to go elsewhere or make a super team, are sort of locked into Furia. So it has to be in Furia, right? Like, pretty sweet, I've got one for you. I've heard that as soon as they broke out at ECS in 2019, it was ECS season 7, I think, you just could not sign their players. Like, apparently you might be tried with some of them. I mean, the funny thing is, I've actually heard that before that, if the players in MIBR had the forethought or sort of prescience, they apparently could have had KSCERATO in that team, I think in 2018, but then I think the players internally said no or something, or someone said no. Basically, that's like a story I heard from inside the MIBR org. Now, there was one player that they did seem to leave who was good from Fury, and that's obviously Henny, right? But he wasn't the original player anyway. And then he did also sort of leave when we were still sort of in the online period. And so I don't really know why that was. I mean, that maybe seems like some sort of a bizarre personal favour granted. But the others, it seems like they just can't, or in the case of KSCERATO, won't leave. They will just stay in that team. They refuse to go as well. Now, I don't blame them, but if they don't want to go and play it in an English language speaking team, etc., I think it's a bit silly because someone like KSCERATO could be amazing in Team Liquid or FaZe or Vitality or G. He could win everything, couldn't he? But if he wants to stay and play, the thing is, there is talent in Brazil. Let's just remake a proper team in Brazil. So what I'm going to do is this. There are loads of players out there, and I am going to go through who I would pick for my super team, and this is from all Brazilian players, even the ones currently contracted. And then I'll go through a bunch of the other names I considered, but I didn't pick. So first and foremost, I am obviously starting my team with KSCERATO. He's not just the best Brazilian player, and by a good distance at this point in time. He's one of the best players in the world. Like, you don't even have to just go rifler. Like, he's just one of the best players in the world. Like, realistically, if it wasn't for things like the tournaments you play and how good his teammates are, even qualifying for events, this guy would be a top 20 player pretty much every year as long as he's motivated and he still puts in the hours. He's a fabulously skilled player. I actually think he's the most obvious name. I mean, you have to start with this player if you want to truly make a Brazilian super team. He's the most outstanding Brazilian player by a distance, and I actually think he actually has the potential to be the best rifler in the world, which is no small feat when we're talking about a world that contains Nico, Rops. I mean, it used to be people like Axel. Obviously, there's the Frozens of the world coming up now. Fantastic riflers out there. Donk, obviously, if he can get there eventually. I even think, by the way, being as I'm sort of going to make this guy, it's in the role, my coldzera, as it were. Spoiler, I'm not going to pick coldzera for this list. I actually think the cool thing is, if you based everything around this guy and gave him max resources and all his best spots, which I do think they've sometimes done in Furia, then absolutely, I actually think this guy can be like contender for best player in the world, and therefore your team, if you do it right, can be a contender for best team in the world. I'll also just throw this out there. It's a topic I've discussed on talk shows before. He hasn't done what coldzera did in his career and reached the heights of greatness, but if you look for the eye test and his body of work, I think he's a more skilled player than coldzera, even at coldzera's peak. I think coldzera never had the raw mechanical ability this guy does, and quite frankly, this guy also has, listen, coldzera had amazing read on the game, but this guy has like the sort of, I would say he's a bit more streaky in terms of like his max performance, but it's a flow state when he gets into it. coldzera just looked like get right, where he just mastered the game. He's a chess master. This guy's just feeling it, and then when he can ride that feeling, I mean, he's one of the most fabulous players to watch you'll ever see. Like, it reminds me of the great Brazilian football players, the Ronaldo, Romario, Rivaldo, Ronaldinho. It's that level of talent. It's just fucking unbelievable how good this guy is. I actually think, sadly, he's been somewhat capped by being in Furia, especially in 2023. Then after that, so I'm obviously taking him as my lurker. I want obviously an aggressive sort of star rifler who can play in the entry pack and big balls players, ideally experienced. So I'm obviously going with Il Monstro, or whatever they call him, Fur. The man, right? Now, obviously, you might go, oh, but didn't he retire? That he's said that a billion times or implied it, right? First of all, he's back already in Oplano with KNG and FNX and Taco. He's already back playing with their bolts. But even last year when he was like supposedly retired when Fallen went to Furia, all like, oh, is he playing? Is he not? Like, this guy, it just seems like he's always had motivation issues. As far as I know, I think he's had motivation issues since like 2017 when they were still one of the best teams in the world. There was like, he had his ear issue where he couldn't hear out of his ear. I think he had surgery on that. By the way, he had that baller response to that, didn't he? Where he was sort of like, yeah, you know, like I prefer not to know where they're coming from. So actually it doesn't matter if I can't hear because I just push anyway, like he did on CT side of Overpass famously. That seemed kind of cool. Look, that made it seem swaggy, but I could also see if you have some some sort of health issue, especially that's capping your ability to like hear in the game like Counter-Strike. That could have an effect on your motivation, right? Then he's been in some fucked up lineups, some of the MIBR ones, Imperial itself, even though he was far and away better than any of those players at the time. He also did do that weird like fake retirement in 2019 around Star Series Season 8 in China, where he just did a tweet one day that was sort of like, oh, that's it for me or whatever. And then after he was like, lol, because he was just trolling. So put all that to one side. As far as I know, this guy plays, again, is available. I don't know if you'd want to play in this team, but this is a team where it's imaginary. They're not really going to have this team, obviously. I would immediately, this is the other obvious name I'm taking along with KSCERATO. And the fact that there's no overlap between their roles, perfect. I'm loving it. I actually do believe this guy is an evergreen talent who, as long as he wants to, can always be at least relevant, if not good. He still seems mechanically good now when I've watched him play last year in 2023. And in Imperial, like I said, I thought he was actually a pretty good player, considering the rest of the team was kind of whack. I think he just has insane talent. Before KSCERATO, this was the most talented Brazilian player for me. And again, it seemed obvious. Like, Imperial really, really highlighted to me that he doesn't even have to seemingly put in the hours. He doesn't have to be years and years ago when his prime was. This guy can just do it. I mean, you can just do it. It's crazy. And by the way, there's that line that Cuban, was it said? I think it was Cuban, said in my Reflections interview that when it was in 2017, the Virtus Pro players used to actually disagree with the rest of us who thought coldzera was the best player in the world and should get all the MVPs. They used to think Fur was better than coldzera due to his role and due to his style. And by the way, just think how he plays. He's obviously much more of a Virtus Pro player than coldzera is. coldzera is more of a get-right device / passive player, and that's just not really the VP style, is it? That's not the plow, really. Crucially, just like KSCERATO, but even more so, I can trust this guy to perform everywhere. Put this guy in an RMR, we're going to get to the major. Put him in the major, he's going to play well. Put him in a major, massive match, he's going to play well against top teams and give me the performance. And as I said, because he's a polar opposite to KSCERATO, I actually not only don't have overlap, I can pick both of them. And there's even a world where I could imagine this recreates the Fur coldzera dynamic where Fur's going early and fucking you up with aggressive, chaotic plays, and then coldzera comes in with all the info and cleans up against people who've been damaged, their positions are known, the map's been split off, and then he just outplays them 1v8. I could see this being fantastic. This even looks already like what a banger super team I've started with, even though one's more of a new school player, one's an old school player. Then I'm going to go with another new school player. I actually was going to make this video last year, funny enough, before he had officially signed. But I think Team Liquid killed it by picking skullz. He was the player, skullz obviously famously of Pain Gaming, that I would have picked. Like, I was shocked it took him this long to get picked up. Like, why are people wasting a mega bucks on people like Fallen when this guy's available? Like, this is the player you add to your team to like spice it up and give yourself a gamble that you become an elite team. I mean, by the way, same in Imperial. What the fuck were they doing in that Imperial team with the players they had? Old ass washed players, and people like him were just available. Zevi's just available, but you're just paying sacks of fucking money to people who just barely do anything except like one tournament run ever, seemingly. Now, look, he doesn't have anywhere close to the experience of all those other players. He's going to be my biggest gamble in this lineup in that sense, because he is still lacking international LAN experience versus the best teams. Like, he only got into Pain in something like, what was it, like August of 2022 or something mental. Like, he hasn't been playing for that long, guys. It's mainly just been the majors. So he is a work in progress, but he's 21 years old. He hasn't played that long, so he hasn't been tainted, as I was told internally by people like Zeus. He hasn't been tainted by the Brazilian scene and the big names and some of the negative attitudes they might have had in the past. And he just has a strong game. Look, we'll see if it can truly manifest on the tier 1 level against the best teams, but it's already, the promise is already there. He looks like he's a player worth giving a go. Then, so I'm obviously going to put him as sort of like just one of my other riflers, star rifler with a bit of aggression, right? Him and Fur. On the lurker side, I've got KSCERATO. We've got 2 spots left. For the AWPer, I'm already going to shock people. I was willing to let Fallen go and be the AWPer of Furia, right? I even thought there was a world where if everything goes right and he's a proper IGL and they let Art go from being IGL, I thought maybe there's a world it could work. It hasn't worked. It just isn't that good. Like, he himself's okay sometimes, but aside from that, the team just really doesn't have that much punch. So, quite frankly, I'm just going to say it. It's going to shock people, but I think I'm taking safe. I'm taking the guy who was in Furia, the famous Pain Gaming player from years earlier. Because, yeah, you're going to go, yeah, but in Furia, it was just like whatever, wasn't he? Yeah, sort of. Now, listen, he wasn't bad, but he wasn't a star AWPer. But if you go look how they used it, they never looked ever like they understood how to use him in that sense. That Team Liquid, is the other team as well as Furia that I think doesn't know how to use star AWPers. They don't even know how to set them up, play around. They're just used to the AWP being in the team, someone doing it, usually as like a secondary role, and then the AWP's just like in the middle of the pack or at the end, and it just does what's necessary. You're not set up for picks. You're not set up to be a star. You're not played around. They maybe sometimes don't even save the AWP for you. Like this guy in Furia, they didn't look like they gave a fuck about this guy. It looked like they just thought, we haven't got Eddie anymore, and the safe guy's also been paid. Add him in, he will just, I don't know, question mark, we've won the major. And they never ever played around. He looked way worse in Furia than he did in Pain. But if you went and watched his games, his skills were still there. He could still hit his shots. It looked like they never gave him the confidence. They never set him up, and they never tried to call his number, as it were. So I think his skills are strong. I actually think mechanically he is a solid AWPer. So I think this is a solid person. Now, the one downside is he's 28 years old, and he's had some experience, but hasn't been great experience in Furia because I haven't had much success necessarily. So, okay, I'm gambling there, but who else am I taking? Mega old Fallen, or like unproven Zevi? I could go with that angle too. This guy's further along the way than Zevi. At least I've seen some performances from him. So this team doesn't have to be one where the AWPer is Kogu. I could just have a good AWPer, and I think he would be better than in Furia. Now I've got one spot left, and it's obviously going to be in-game leader / support role. Because think about it, I've got like my 2 riflers, I've got a lurker, so I've got 3 riflers, I've got my AWPer. So what I'm going to do is, I'm making a super team. I'm going to make my IGL my support as well. So there's 2 ways we can go with this one. I think the player I actually would pick is still Fallen. Now it depends. If he costs 700k, maybe I'm not picking him for this one. As in, just don't use the AWP, mate, or be the secondary AWP. I think that would be fine. Just make yourself a support in the same way as when they got Get Right and Gux, superstar Swedish players, in 2009 in Fnatic. DSN and Khan started to transition to more of a supportive element. They gave up roles, they gave up resources, space in the team. They played for the rest of the squad. When it came to CS2, and Neo and Taz weren't the monster superstar players they had been in 1.6, they transitioned over so they could let Pasha and Bialy and Snacks be the stars, and they could take the other roles and they could run the team out. It's time for Fallen to do that and put that fucking AWP down. So put the AWP down and just be a support and an IGL. And with this super team of players, I think you can even do it. I don't think you have to be a brilliant IGL. Just call simple defaults. Call a few smoke tactics. Set up people like Fur and skullz to get the entries. Get people like the AWPer in a good position. Let KSCERATO have whatever he needs and then have the resources to carry and clean up afterwards. This could be enough. Now, if I can't take Fallen, the other angle is obvious. It's Taco. He can do a bit of the IGLing, and I know he can do the supporting, and he's already got the mindset for that. So you can go either on that one. I'd probably take Fallen because it is a super team. But if I wanted to actually be maybe more of like a glue guy, maybe I'd go with Taco. Maybe I'd put one less ego into the mix, right? You'll notice the main issues, and this is why we're going to look at a lot of other names now. The main issues and the main roles are in-game leader and AWP, which is ridiculous because you think about it. Fallen was one of the greatest in-game leaders ever in Counter-Strike. He comes from Brazil and still around and is an AWPer. And if you want to go for AWPers, like obviously Kogu was like, I think maybe the greatest AWPer ever in Counter-Strike. But you even had mega other players after that. Like first of all, there's loads of other players in the other teams like G3X and other MIBR lineups. But then you even had people like Ton and PRD and some of these names out there who could definitely fucking up Fallen himself at the end, right? So where are all the AWPers in CS2? Where are the IGLs, by the way? That's the crazy. That's why people like coldzera and like Taco have sort of tried being IGL, because they just aren't out there. Like you go and look, like there just barely are any. Then in terms of coach, look, I don't care that he's on Team Liquid. I'm taking him for my super team. I'll take Zeus all day long. He has the mentality. He's coached elsewhere. He knows Brazilian players. He knows the newer Brazilian players. He knows the older Brazilian players. He knows the history of Counter-Strike. Like this guy is just, I think, one of the best coaches ever, contended for the best coach to ever coach in Counter-Strike. So of course I'm instantly taking him for a Brazilian super team. If I can't take him, the other answer seems obvious. It's Peacemaker, right? Look, he's never really been a part of like a team that was truly winning the big events that often. But I'll tell you what, he's coached up a lot of other good squads. And in general, I'd say if you look, he has a net positive effect on his teams. And I think with these talents, you'd obviously have a chance to do something. Now, there are some names immediately you're going to think of, like, where's Yuri? Where's the other star of Furia? Well, that's my problem. Is he a star of Furia? To me, he was great. If you go back like 2019, 2020, 2021, it's one of the best, right? But already in 2021, I started to see him fall off a bit. And I actually think his game by 2022 and 2020, it just fell off a cliff eventually. Like, eventually for me, especially last year, he got way too He's not enough production. He's too passive. He doesn't even seem like he has the star mentality. Like, I'm actually concerned about this guy. I'm surprised there isn't more conversation and scrutiny around him. Maybe it's because he got fallen at art in his team. Or maybe it's because people just get distracted by the brilliance of KSCERATO, or they looked at, Shafe isn't AWPing that well, or what's Drop doing? So I guess he just got to be the guy who chilled, right? He got to be like CS royalty in that sense. But I'm not taking him for a fucking super team until I've seen that he can do some of that old stuff. Then Henny, by the way, still a skilled player. Still seems like he's the same guy. The problem is, I mean, you just look at his career. How can I rely on him? How can I rely he's even going to be in 6 months or a year, or they wants to be here in 6 months or a year, or even if he likes it now, they're still going to be vibing with me in 9 months, 12 months, 15 months from now. Seems a little bit like a head case, or a little bit unprofessional, or maybe he cares more about just playing with his brother or friends than he does about being a top pro. If so, that's cool. Lord, I loved you in this team, but maybe it ain't for you. Then you got Cello. Now, I did think he was kind of clutch when he was in Imperial. He looked like one of the better players, especially, it was like him and Fur were the best players in that team for my money. The problem is, it does look like when they banged him in Fury, he didn't fit all those drop rolls, actually. It did seem like it actually just crashed his game and made him look bad. So now people probably don't want him. I don't mind him, actually. I think he's an all right player. I really did consider him for this team. Speaking of bolts, my problem with this is, I did actually think if you went back to 2016 to sort of maybe 2018, Bolts was a quality player. He was minimum serviceable. At times he was pretty good, actually, and at times he did look like maybe he could be a true replacement for Taco when he was in the SK MIBR sort of era, right? The issue is, I don't think he's that player anymore. He also, to me, has always seemed like a little bit nervous in big games on when he's got a lot of pressure on him. And so I just wonder, actually, I also feel like he's one of those people who maybe just has trauma from being wrecked and kicked out those teams and scapegoated, and then the results go down, your stats go down, then they boot you, then you have to work all the way back, then it happens again, because how could you, like a moth to a flame, deny the request to fall in and cold area to come and play with them? But you get the point. So basically, I think they kind of ruined Bolts, unfortunately. I think this is years ago I'd probably pick him. I'm not picking him for this team. An up-and-coming name who I really could have picked, I just haven't seen enough, has to be Insaney, the guy from MIBR as a rifler. This guy is a real prospect. I'm telling you, the eye chest looks really interesting for this player. He's only something like 19, 20 years old. He's really aggressive. You already saw him do some upset stuff at Blast with MIBR. I think this guy, look, in a year or two, maybe he is on my list. Maybe this is the one I pick. But he's not actually far enough along as even skullz yet. So for me, I went with skullz for now. As I said before, for the other obvious name to me, if I don't go with Safe and I don't go with Fallen, it's obviously Zevi, isn't it? The Pain gaming player. The problem is he also doesn't have enough experience, so it's a gamble. I don't really like to gamble on my AWPer. I always say tier 1 AWP is the biggest mismatch in World Counter-Strike. If you're a fraud, like people years ago like Man2 were, you get exposed. You get absolutely sure. I think even people like Cadian got shown up at times before they really kicked into gear. This guy's 22 years old. He could still get there. There's still a year or two. Let's see what he does elsewhere. Certainly one I'd be looking at for the future, and especially if he gives me more on LAN. Vinny, I do think seems like personality-wise, he can be like the taco of your team. He can just be one less ego, cool guy, seems like a glue guy, seems like he does whatever you want, soldier, play any role you want, any position you want. The problem is I just don't think he's that good. I think he's all right. I just think he's all right. Now, I don't think he's bad. I actually thought he had sort of like the floor of his game was pretty decent, but not that spectacular to me. And for my support, I've gone for a super team. I'm taking Fallen or Taco guys. So for this one, I can just skip Vinny. He's not really a player I need. What's amazing is I didn't actually particularly consider Art much, which shows you how much his game's dropped off. Because if you go back in time, in 2019 and 2020, Art was one of the most promising rising stars of the year, of the world. And then towards the end of 2020, it was sort of like Yakindar. And then the next year we were going into like the Gambit youngsters. This guy was supposed to by now be like consistently a top 20 player in the world, and maybe on good years he can go in the top 10. Like he could be that like crazy X factor on your team, and obviously at one point in time he's the X factor, this weird like lurk / entry, and he would go super aggro, and he was the IGL, so we could play up tempo with all these smokes and utility. I've got some superstar riflers with me, we don't need the op. Like you can see how it worked back then. It hasn't worked for ages. His calling fucking stinks, which is why I call him Fart. He seems like he's got a massive ego as well. It seems like he's even taking back some IGL in aspects from Fallen, even fucking Fallen. You're not even gonna like Fallen IGL, bro. And then on top of that, his game individually, I do think dropped off. Now, I will say, when he stopped being the IGL, you look at he actually popped off a little bit more, but then he just seemed disconnected. Like a problem he has, in my opinion, is this. When Happy was the in-game leader of Envious, if he was really good, then his style worked to call the game around himself and make his lurking style work. I think with Art, he to some degree does call around himself and play that super aggro, really wonky style with super streaky up and down results. That's why Yakindar wasn't appropriate to be an IGL. So actually, I don't really know attitude-wise if he's not IGL, and I don't want him to be IGL. Then you've got Jota from MIBR. I actually think was a rising talent. If you go back, I think if you go back to like 2022, looked like he was actually going to become someone. Maybe didn't quite get there. If you're thinking of the 0-0 Nation boys, the first one's obviously Dumao. He was the best of that team for me. The problem I have is when I watched him play Tier 1, in the context of trying to be a star, I don't think he quite adapted yet. Again, still time potentially to do so. Lacosi just wasn't really a player I vibed with. Wasn't really one that jumped ahead of the other names. Like I said, I might even have picked Taco. If I didn't pick Taco and I picked Fallen, then the reason why I maybe didn't pick Taco is, one, his game has degraded and he wasn't like super high up in stats anyway. And then I do think mentality is really important. But if I've got a real super team, it's not like one guy's mentality will just change the whole team. I think actually in that sense, it's more like I would use it on a different type of a team if I'm going all like personality or chill vibes or whatever. The guy where, I actually forget how you even say this, isn't like Branzan? Listen, there was something there. Not enough for me to latch onto in the way I even have for an Insani or a Zevi or something. And then the obvious one I've always put out there, if FNX was the problem child of Brazilian Counter-Strike in 1.6, because in CSGO it was a known quantity, then the problem child of Brazilian Counter-Strike in CSGO was Phelps. Another fabulously talented rifler, bit on the aggressive side with streaky skills, nice mechanics, who could be really good and can be top, but seems to be in his own head and doesn't accept mistakes, and then goes up and down and gets out of the top team, but then you bring him back into, give me a break. It's the same shit all over again. Another head case. Like, you know what's another problem the Brazilian scene has is, culturally, they seem to have different priorities, or people think like, I don't know, what I think is unprofessional behaviour, or not really being that dedicated or diligent, seems to be sort of like considered cool or swaggy or something. I don't get it. Like, I like grinders. I like people like Cold Zero just fucking going there. Like, look, if you're going to be a guy, like, I barely play and I just do whatever you want, you better be like fucking Fur. You better be a monster. You better be so good that, like, I can almost believe that maybe you're some guy, a bit like Wonder in League of Legends, suppose he's, when he was on G2, where it's like he's actually better if he doesn't scrim that much, if he just sort of like gets his head in the right space, thinks about the match, does a bit of theory, and then goes in and just dominates. If you dominate, yeah, you don't have to be a grinder. But if you're not grinding and we don't dominate and we don't win and we don't succeed and go to the events, then that's kind of whack to me. Like, why aren't we making any teams with big salaries? Why would I ever make a super team? So to me, the talent's there. I actually think Brazil could have a banger super team. Like this super team I'm making now, I think if these players are all at their peak level, and no, I don't mean in fall in terms of like his original peak, I mean if he just plays my role and plays well, and the rest of them, the KSCERATOs are really good, and skullz is really good, and first, so, yeah, I think that lineup right there, like that's a top 10 team in the world. I mean, who knows? Depending on how good like skullz and KSCERATO are, and if I get safe implemented, maybe we can start to become a dark horse and we can really be mixing up. We'll be better than Furia, I'll tell you that much. By the way, remember, as you see in the bottom right of the screen, the sale is still going for GamerSupps, 22% off. And if you make an order, remember to add some free samples so you get to try some other flavours. I've had to make a lot of tough choices in my career, but thanks to the support of my Patreon community, the Skrilluminati, I never have to make tough financial decisions. So this video and all the rest on my channel are kindly supported by Ahmed Hadjou, Frisky, Pugnatio, Rajcula, Animosity, Jensen Goh, Tobias Bernasconi, Tosh, Torin, and you know it if you've ever heard before, and you'll hear it many times in the future. A special thanks goes out to my main man, Jerry Keys Minion. Do you want to ask a question in my video AMA? Do you want to be part of one of those long discussions where we talk about whatever you like in esports? Do you want teasers, find out who the upcoming guests are going to be? Or maybe you want to suggest a topic for a future Thorin's Thoughts type video? Well, if any of these perks or others appeal to you, put your money where your mouth is today and join the Skrilluminati by joining the Patreon link in the description box below.